Hello everyone. In today's locomotive profile, we'll be doing is one of Erie's Railroad's 210-2s, the second series, and that is Erie Railroad Class R2. They were the second series of heavy 210-2 Santa Fe type steam locomotive of three classes built in 1910s for heavy drag service on freight duties that ran on the Erie Railroad. In 1915, as the first locomotives were R1 batch of 210-2s arrived on the property in February. The railroad was also consisting of building a second type of heavy Santa Fe's for the railroad's heavy freight needs for expanding needs the need of the early 20th century. In fall 1915, an answer emerged, a slightly larger version, initially the smaller railroad in the East Coast, the New York, Ontario, and Western Railway, took an order of 12 heavy 210-2s with wagon top boilers sporting very large 31 times 32 pistons with small 57 drivers. The Erie Railroad decided that its next delivery would be based on the design, but with some better modifications in steaming capacity. Turning towards the trusted builder, the American Locomotive Company's Schenectady Works, for a new order. This type classified as the R2 sported the same cylinder diameter, but the Erie redesigned them with larger 63 drivers with mechanical stokers. Their boiler pressure were pressed to 200 pounds. Then the New York, Ontario, and Western X locomotive class at 190 pounds, producing 83,000 pounds of tractive effort, matching the capacity of earlier R1s, with shorter fire tubes and larger with a wider firebox. These engines had rather chunky, short appearance, with massive 104 rear diameter of boiler in the style of the wagon top type when built. All were delivered with medium Vanderbilt tenders, with 90 tons of coal and 10,000 gallons of water. One thing about the R2s and the NYO and W's X class shared in common was they both had inside frame, open trailing truck, wheels. Alco Schenectady delivered the first 5 in November 1915, of eventual 30 by summer of 1917. The Erie units were all stoker equipped as the X class beforehand, were all delivered as handed fire units, meaning some of them are mechanical stokers while the others are hand fired meaning that the firemen had to shovel a lot of coal into the firebox of the locomotive. Put into service 5 units by January 1916. The R2s was larger than the R1s in terms of boiler specs, but the R1s had longer boilers, tubes, and wheelbase assigned to heavy drag freight service. These locomotives were found to be successful on helper/pusher service in Pennsylvania and New York. It was found that although they operated at the same traction, the R2s were better steaming and had better factors of abrasion, although did not differ by very much. They were liked better than the R1 and were great haulers, although being a bit rough on the track with their thick, heavy counterweights. The next 25 were delivered between June of 1916 and June 1917, totaling 30 in the late 1920s. A majority of numbers of the class were received larger 6-axle rectangular tender in place of the smaller Vanderbilts. These newer tenders were given from S1 and S3 class Berkshires when they were switched to larger coal tenders after 1929, as these greatly improved the R2's distances. Around this time, by 1930, several received more modern DuPont type B-stokers with Wellington feedwater heaters mounted in front of the smokestack of the firebox, with cold and hot water pipes reaching down to the pilot's mounted pump, keeping their sides air pumps on the fireman's side, as the majority of them received new steel ladders on their pilot decks. The conversion was successful and the rebuilt R2 engines remained in prime freight duties, where speed was no such concern. Even so, they were popular to double head with the S-class Berkshires. As said, all 210-2s on the railroad were well renowned for their great power, although not very popular with crews. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, the Erie put the majority of Vanderbilt-equipped unbuilt R2s in storage, as they lacked funds and service couldn't always keep them in full use along with the others, with more than what was needed when changing times of speed terms. The first several locomotives were scrapped early in November to December of 1939, as all rebuilt units were kept in service in the roles they could find. After America joined World War II in December 1941, several were being scrapped at the time, as a variety of them were still in service, primarily the rebuilt units. All the remaining R2s by April 1942 were bought up from storage and pressed into heavy freight service, and secondary roles throughout the industrial east of Pennsylvania, along with other R series locomotives. Due to their age and speed, they help out in pusher rolls on steep grades that were so well designed to conquer. Some of the rebuilt units were ideal double-headed with other modern power thanks to their strength. One was known to give up the long haul tender for a regular vendor belt for short distance pusher/helper assignments. In the 1940s, as most of the NYO and W's similar X Class 210-2s were scrapped by June 1944. The Erie kept onto them longer until the railroad began buying new diesel-electric power after 1945. In the late 1940s, as the diesels began replacing freight locomotives, the 210-2s were the first mode of power to being cut up, as scrapping resumed in 1947. By January 1949, only 3 were on the roster with full fleet of Berkshires, and by spring of 1950, only 1 R2 was in full service as the sole survivor of the class actively, as number 4213 was sold for scrap in April of 1950. It was the very last of the early Erie 210-2s to reach the breaker's yard, and the longest lived of all the R2s. And sadly and unfortunately, as steam operations was discontinued in March 1954, and all of them are now extinct, which is a pity though, because they were the longest lived locomotive in the Erie. And it's a shame though that they could have at least leave one of them preserved. Well, we do have the railroad models of them to keep the legend and legacy alive. And that's it for this video. See you later, guys.